Hello, everyone. Welcome back to whatever this podcast is. Today, it's my privilege to be joined by Pelin Akyol. She is assistant professor at Belkent University and is also a colleague of mine at E61 Institute, a research manager. At E61, she focuses on disability and carer work. So we work together a lot on social policy, and she's very focused on things around disability and carers and that part of the social safety net, while I'm thinking more about unemployed people. But she also has a rich background in terms of empirical methodology and education. And I'm hoping today I can pick her brain on a paper that's coming out soon related to education. So how's it going, Pelin?
Thank you, Matt. It's great, and it's great to be here as your guest. Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent, excellent. So I'll just say what the title of your paper is. It's Do Time Constraints Matter? How, Why, and for Whom? And I see it's talking a lot about multi-choice tests. And as a Kiwi, have a lot of experience with multi-choice tests because we freaking love them over there. Would you be able to tell us a bit about what your paper's about?
Of course, as a Turkish person, I also had lots of these exams, and maybe partially the reason why I'm working on these projects are my experience. So in this paper, we look at how time constraints on exams affect students' performance. And more importantly, we are trying to understand who benefits from more time and why. And to understand that, we ran a lab in field experiment with high school students in Turkey, and we randomly assigned them to more or less time on a multiple choice exam. And then we built a structural model to understand the underlying mechanisms. So and we find that the findings are super interesting, actually. We find that extra time improves score. This part is not interesting. This is something that we expected. But it affects students differentially. I mean that, for example, men gains more from more time than women, which is totally opposite to what I would expect. Because from my observation, I say women always stress about time, and I feel like this anxiety leads to lower performance on their side. But what we find is men actually use time more efficiently relative to women. They also use time. Obviously, it improves scores of men and women, but improves men's score more than women, which is interesting.
Yeah. So how do you posit that occurs?
Our goal is to understand what are the other factors that altogether have an effect on the exam performance. This includes, for example, number of questions in the exam, difficulty of the questions, student ability, how all of these things interact with each other. And to be able to understand this, we basically build a structural model that includes all of these components. And we try to understand how all of these factors interact with each other.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'll ask a bit about the structural model later in terms of how these processes function. But just at this early stage, I'm interested in what exactly is this time constraint? Like, intangibly, what is the more time constrained test like, and what is the less time constrained test like?
So a time constrained exam is something like SAT, GRE, TOEFL, opportunity class exam, selective schools exam. These are all exams that are conducted under time constraint. But obviously, all exams are conducted under time constraint, but in some cases, we may have more time. For example, let's take take-home exams. So we basically take the exam, go home, and work in our own time. We don't stress about whether the time will be enough or not. So, and in some cases, we give more time to students not to stress them about time. These are all exams conducted under time constraint, but the time pressure is different.
Mm.
In some cases, students work under time constraint and time pressure, substantial time constraint. And in other cases, they have more time, so they don't need to stress about time because time is not binding constraint in their case.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, and that clarifies that there's actually a lot of different margins that can interact when you change that time constraint. When you're building your random assignment, what refers to the time constrained group and what refers to the non-time constrained group? How do
Yeah,
you differentiate them?
excellent question. So actually, we are a bit affected by a change in Turkey university entrance exam. So they increased time available for students, if I remember it correct, in 2011. And basically, they increased the time, almost doubled the time. So we try to replicate this change in this paper and in our experiment. So basically, in our control group, students are given 30 minutes for 48 questions. And in the treatment group, students are given for the same number of questions, 75 minutes. So it is almost doubled. So we are looking at these margins. And basically, our experimental results just tell us what is the effect of doubling time. So therefore, actually, to be able to say more about what would happen if we triple or if we increase even more, we need a structural model.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So the experimental results are about increasing the time while holding the other structures in the test the same. And then a structural model allows you to dig into a lot of those other details.
Exactly.
In the results that you were discussing, you mentioned that it's surprising that men appear to get a larger marginal gain from additional time to women. Is that because men start with higher scores, or is that due to something in the literature pointing out that men tend to work better under time pressure?
Excellent question. This is something that we taught a lot. It's not because of men start with higher ability for sure. It is about the way men use time in their processing of these questions. It's about their cognitive processing of these questions, how to see it, how to use the signal they get from these answers, possible answers, and process it. And in that case, it is not that man is doing it better or woman is doing better, but man uses time differently than women. And for that reason, it helps them better in multiple choice exams. So it's just cognitive processing of men and women are different. And there's a literature in psychology actually that investigate these, and there are some supporting evidence that we find that the similar stories are available in there that supports our finding. Their brains are working differently.
Oh, that's really interesting. In terms of gaining benefits from time, like if I intuit on a sample of one, which is just myself, I love time pressure, and you give me more time, I don't tend to do much better. So hearing the idea that in general men tend to, get this greater gain, they tend to produce more score when they have additional time is something that surprises me, and definitely a result it would be good to chat about a bit more. The when something else that came up in the paper was a discussion of non-monotonicity in terms of the time effects. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, this relates to the idea that you might get re-ranking of individuals due to the heterogeneous effect of time for them. So individuals that might have done really well with that short test, the example I had before being myself, if you give them more time, they become a much more average student, which is also what I became. Um, how do we think about that, both in terms of equity and in terms of what the tests are telling us about people's ability to go into the labor market and perform skills and undertake tasks?
Yeah, I think there's a big equity issue here because, as you said, when we change time, the score of students change and different groups of students are affected differently. So, for example, if we give more time, men perform better than women, which means that their ranking improves. So then when we consider the fact that we allocate college seats, selective school seats, sometimes jobs by using these scores, then which means that it gives more advantage to those students who improve their score just because they have more time or they use time better than others, right? So there is an equity issue here.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it points to another topic I'm quite interested in here. How does this reflect people's sort of the reason why you'd select them into a job or a university in the first place? So, do you have any insights at this sort of early stage of thinking around how allowing people more time, does it mean that people that are then being selected in tend to be the ones that will perform better? Or putting people under time constraints might itself reflect something about their ability in the labor market or their ability in education? Or is there not the longitudinal data available to dig into that type of margin?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, actually. This is very important because I think we should start with thinking about what do we want to measure with these exams. Do we really want to measure knowledge on that subject? Or do we want to measure how quickly students can solve those questions in that subject? If it is the second one, yes, time constraint is important. But when we think about for what reason we are using these exams, and mostly, as I said, allocating seats in colleges, it seems like it's just about knowledge because we allocate those seats to, or we want to people with the highest ability. Here, ability does not mean that students with low scores are not high ability. As we have been talking about, there are various factors affecting scores. But if it is the final goal, then we should just, the aim should be just measuring the knowledge on that subject. But if, for example, we are trying to hire for a position that requires very quick responses to some issues, then we may want to give a time pressured exam and include this as an additional factor for us to, just consider as a performance measure. But if it is not the case, then I think it is better to decrease the effect of time constraint on this course.
Yeah. No, I think that's really useful. To criticize my own question, I was diving so much to labor market responses. If in the labor market an employer really values people being able to respond quickly, they can test that on applications. That's the
Yeah.
thing. In terms of thinking about allocation into universities based on knowledge, you probably do want the most accurate reading of that. So that's very true.
Yes.
Related to that, so when talking about time constraints, there are likely a lot of other margins of assessment that affect how we judge someone's knowledge and someone's allocation into university and the such and into the labor market. Would you be able to talk around those and what else you've been able to find around that interacts with the time constraint?
Oh, amazing question. Because in our model, we take into account, for example, question difficulty and students' ability and time constraint altogether. So basically, and also risk aversion, I forgot to mention, it's super important, risk aversion and confidence, because basically the design of these multiple choice exams usually put negative marking for wrong answers. The idea behind this is just to prevent students to randomly guess the question, get it right, and improve their scores. So basically, if we don't impose this negative marking, students who are lucky on that day may get higher scores so that they may gain advantage, right? To prevent this, test designers usually put a negative marking so that if the students get the question wrong, they are penalized with negative score. So this adds another layer of complexity, because in this case, students' risk aversion or confidence also gets into the play, and those students who are more risk averse are less likely to guess. For example, consider a case, there are 5 options, student eliminated one of the options. Now there are ideally 1 correct answer, 3 wrong answers. Expected score from guessing is positive, but if the student is risk averse, they may skip the question so that it's gonna decrease their expected score. So when we consider risk aversion, confidence, question difficulty, time constraint, and ability altogether, they are all interacting with each other. And in the paper, we find that to be able to measure students' knowledge in the subject, we should give students questions that align with their, in terms of difficulty, that aligns with their ability. So maybe I can explain this more precisely with an example. Let's consider a student group who knows the subject very well. And if we give an easy exam, what are we going to learn from this? Nothing, right? They are all going to do perfectly. In terms of ranking, we are not going to get anything. So let's consider another case. Students with the low stock of knowledge on the subject, we give a very hard exam. They will not be able to do anything. Again, we are not going to learn any information. So basically, what should happen is question difficulty should align with student ability so that we can actually use these exams to measure students' knowledge on that subject. And as we increase time, we can think this as improved ability. In our model, it works in this way. So when we increase time, it enhances ability to distinguish correct answer from the wrong ones. So then when we give more time, maybe, for example, if the questions are already easy, it's not going to help students, right? Because this additional time will not give them any additional benefit to solve the questions. Again, if the questions are extremely hard relative to students' ability, increasing time a bit will not help them again because questions are still very hard. So what we are finding is time matters only for questions within the reach of students' ability. Otherwise, they're not going to help. So basically, what we find is time is going to help students if there are some questions within their reach, and with the additional boost of time, they can solve them.
That makes a lot of sense. In the case of young men seeing a larger boost in their scores, is that coming from the fact that the distribution of the test is structured in such a way that there's a lot of questions that are like that for them? Or is it to do with them being especially risk averse? Or is there some other mechanism that your structural modeling elicited to describe what was happening?
Excellent question. I think no, the thing is, in the model, we control for risk aversion and confidence together, and we also have ability, question difficulty. They are all separately controlled. This just comes from how time is used, and it is totally different. It is independent of all of these other factors that works, so that men, as I said, basically use time more efficiently in this multiple choice exam case.
I see. I wonder, you are one of the most knowledgeable people about this Turkish context, and I am one of the least knowledgeable people about Turkey. Don't tell my wife that. But the key thing there is when we're looking at people going into these exams, uh, is there a situation where young men and young women are being tutored in different ways about how to think about questions and how to work in the exams that are affecting this? Or is it something about their, like, is it a biological difference? Or is it some type of social norm in terms of how people act?
Excellent question. I don't have a scientific answer, but I'm just gonna tell whatever I think.
Good.
I it it is not it. I don't think that it's because of the way they are trained, because basically in Turkey, these exams are extremely important, and students. When I was a student, I also did the same thing. So students spend extensive amount of time to get prepared for these exams, and particularly for the time constraint reason, time reason, they train themselves and they constantly work, solve similar type of questions again and again. So I don't think that there's much of a difference in terms of gender on that side, but uh, the reason that they are using the time differentially might be coming from biological reasons, or the way they are raised might be another reason. I mean, it's hard to distinguish the two things, basically. I mean, we don't observe any of those things in our data or in anywhere. So it's hard to know. But it is definitely not because of training.
Yeah, yeah. No, the nature versus nurture thing is always
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah.
When it comes to heterogeneity, were there other important distinguishing margins, such as regional differences?
We didn't look at this. The reason why we didn't look at this is we run our experiment in one region, I mean, in a
Ah,
school, basically. So we didn't look at this. But the good thing about structural model is our results. I mean, we run counterfactual analysis, not in terms of region, obviously, but we can ask, what if we look at lower ability students? What if we improve or increase the question difficulty? What if we give more questions? We could have asked all of those additional questions and get an answer. So, but basically, we don't have any results about regions. And it might be a nice thing to have, actually, which will
yeah,
help
yeah.
us to maybe identify how the way people are raised has an effect on their time usage.
Oh, it's always a sign of a good paper when it makes you think of an entire research agenda.
Yeah.
We can't expect one paper to be doing everything, and
Yeah.
it's focusing on the heterogeneity you can see and fully explaining it with a structural model is very powerful. Is there with the structural model, um, how would you describe the process of the test score being created? So is it some type of like individual level production function where individuals put in effort and then there are these other factors associated with them that multiply that and then a score comes out? You also describe sort of it being a signaling process. Is that something that's
Yeah.
within a production function, or am I sort of misunderstanding how this goes together?
No, 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 you are not misunderstanding. We have a model where students are getting signal from each of the answers in a multiple choice exam. So basically, this signal depends on their ability, time available, and the question difficulty. And obviously, we have a very complex functional form for this that allows time to affect different difficulty questions differently. But basically, students' signal from correct answer will increase when their ability is high or time is high, or it is going to be lower if the question is a harder question. So when they get these signals from all of the 5 options, then they convert this into a probability. What is my probability of getting each of these answers correct? For example, if I choose A, my probability of getting it correct is 80%, but if I choose B, it is 20%, and others are 0, let's say. Then, depending on risk aversion of the student, they decide whether to go with the highest probability answer or skip it, because skipping is also an option in this case, even that there's a negative marking, right? So then, once they picked or decide whether to answer, whether to skip, or which answer to choose, we just basically sum them up and find the score of students. And this is basically how things work all together.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Did you look at the counterfactual where you change a specific design decision, such as removing negative marking, to understand what happened?
We looked at this. This is such a great question because, when we remove negative marking, obviously there is no risk to answer, right? Because basically the expected score from guessing is gonna be either 0 or positive. It's not gonna be negative. So in such a setting, it's always good to guess. So when we remove negative marking, what happens is noise associated with the score will increase, and their relation to actual ability will decrease. So basically, when we remove negative marking, the correlation between score, rank, and ability rank will get worse, which is not a good thing, which is not something that we don't want to have, right?
Oh, that's powerful. So a main takeaway there is very much that negative ranking is important for this assessment to represent what you want it to represent. Were there other margins that were sort of highlighted when you went through this work?
Another thing is what we find, because of these gender differences, when we rank students all together, overall correlation between score and ability to rank is not good. But when we do this, I mean, it's not that it's not good, but relative to the case where we rank students by gender, it is worse. So which means that if we can rank students by gender in terms of their ability and score, it's going to give us a better understanding of students' performance within this exam, within their gender.
In that specific case, how do you measure ability outside of the score, or is this just within the structural model rather than in the?
Another excellent question. So what we have in the data is we observe students' performance in mock exams for this university entrance exam, and as well as their high school GPA. So if we just had mock exam results, it would be still problematic because these are still multiple choice exams. And on average, females might be still, for example, performing worse. But having GPA will help us to get the ability, because GPA is a combination of various exams, and they are usually open-ended questions. They include open-ended questions. As a result, we use all of them together, and basically, simply, I can say that we get the fixed effect, individual fixed effect, as a ability of students.
No,
so
that makes sense.
It is coming from total outside of structural model and the data, I mean, the experimental data.
No, that's interesting. How much do you think that the design decisions that you're working through in this work reflect design decisions that should be taken into account in other countries? For example, in New Zealand, multi-choice tests virtually never have negative marks in them.
I am surprised that you don't have negative marking because I understand the reason why some countries or why some institutions remove negative marking. The idea is there's a general belief that women are more risk averse, so that having negative marking differentially affect them and decrease their scores. So, for example, in SAT, at some point, negative marking was removed. But negative marking in this paper, and I have another paper about multiple choice exams, actually negative marking improves exams performance in terms of measuring students' knowledge in the exam. So it is a good thing to have because it is reducing the noise associated with this course.
I think it's an important practical point that, negative marking improves the ability for the test to function in the way it's intended to be. And, perhaps it's something that New Zealand educators have already learnt. I remember back in the day, I had seen in New Zealand a bunch of your work because the Department of Education had been looking at it. So maybe they've already taken that on board.
Yeah, actually, my co-author in the previous work is also from New Zealand.
He is. James Key,
Yes.
he went to university with me as well. So it's just how small this world is.
Yeah.
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 Were there any other key takeaways you want to discuss from this work?
Yeah, one other thing maybe I can mention is so basically adaptive tests perform much better than the exams like multiple choice fixed questions type of exams. So because in adaptive tests, students give a response depending on their performance in that question, they receive another question. If, for example, they get the question correct, they get a harder one. So basically it adjust question and exam difficulty depending on students' performance, which performs much better relative to the fixed number of questions with fixed difficulty. So it is one thing that we find again, but this is not something that we have highlighted. I think this is already known in the education sector very well, but there are some practical difficulties about conducting this adaptive test because basically you should also design these exams very well. But it is one thing that I can mention that our findings also support this adaptive tests perform much better.
Now that's super interesting. So adaptive tests, I can understand them performing better in one sense, but I watch a lot of football, and often you'll have these sort of round robin tournaments where you will, if you win a game, you stay in the winner's bracket, or you could drop down to the loser's bracket, and you can have really good teams do quite badly early and end up, on a fundamentally worse path and having sort of a lower expected probability of how they're going to go just because of a coin flip in their first game. And so that comes back to a lot of the design about a test. If you have an adaptive test and someone due to pure noise struggles early on in the test, the concern is that they'll get penalized and unable to, like if they were a top student, but out of pure chance, they ended up failing on the first test, and that ruled them out of ever showing up in the top third of the distribution, that would be quite a concern. So is there anything you can speak to about the design of these adaptive tests that can help to ameliorate that, or is that just some sort of feature that needs to be accepted?
Excellent question. Yes, I think it's a feature that should be accepted, but at the same time, as a researcher, I think we need to just investigate more about, what is the effect of this? Because when I'm thinking about this example, I will receive an average difficulty question. I might be a very high ability student, and by chance, by unluck, I don't know, I can get it wrong. In this case, I'm going to get a lower difficulty question. But this time, I should get it correct, right? If I am high ability, I should get it correct. And then maybe move back to, the harder questions. But if I am getting the second question again wrong, then maybe we should start to think about the assumption of I being high ability student.
That's
right?
true.
So, but I don't know exactly. As I said, I mean, we need to do more research about those adaptive tests as well. If I am sure there are research about this. I don't want to be ignorant, but not that I know in economics literature.
Very good. Well, thanks for the chat, Pelin. I think this was really, really fun.
Thank you for having me. So it was great to chat to you. So thanks.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the next chat we have about fertility and the baby bonus. Just to
Looking
spoil
forward to it.
things. Yeah.
Looking
Now
forward
you
to
have
it.
to come back.
Yeah, I will.
Excellent.
I will, definitely.
Cool. Thank you. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.